Hello guys, Shoker the Fool here, back at it again with yet another review of a comic book. This is from Big Man Comics, and this is Empyrean Earth Illuminated. And Big Man Comics has a pretty special place in my heart because Dean Cain, American Lawman, I believe is like the first comic I ever reviewed on Velvet Room Publishing. Of course, Gabe Eltaeb was the colorist on Isom. He helped get the Rippaverse off the ground. So he's a very talented guy, very nice guy. Also, and does really fantastic work with Akian, who is the main artist on this book, along with Dean Cain, American Lawman, I should say. And you've got the Webbs, who are Nate, Heidi, Madeline, and Mercedes Webbs, who are the original story, but Gabe is the writer. He's also the colorist, along with a slew of other people. We've got R.G. Van Buren, Adrienne Eltaeb, or etc. Josie Marie Flores doing the color flats. But anyways, enough about the people who worked on the book. Let's talk about the book itself. And this is really just an epic space opera. It's about 128 pages, so it's really beefy. And the story is extremely dense, but it has this very typical plot. It's very much a Star Wars-esque plot where you've got rebels versus an evil empire, even though it's a bit more unique in the sense that there are people who are working for the Emperor, who is Casimir, if I'm saying it correctly, and then eventually they defect from working for Casimir, and then they go and basically move the plot forward, which is finding, going from the hellish sci-fi dystopian planet under the thumb of the Emperor to attempting to find Earth Illuminated. Right, and it's also got this religious aspect to it, or I should say this Christian aspect to it. Of course, it's got Hebrews 11:1, a book from the New Testament, and that does have a very, I would say, it gets more explicit at the end, but it is pretty much a very like subtle undertone that like Christianity is lost, but it's like coming back, which I honestly think is a really cool thing to do. I find it to be a very interesting concept of like where you have humans advancing beyond Earth, but the Christian paradigm still being what governs everything, as it should be, right? So I think, if you see like more of these books in the future, if the story continues, which I think it should, that probably would become a much more substantial thing. But the art is by Akian, like I said. Gabe Eltaeb is one of the colorists, but he's a master colorist and he does fantastic work. Of course, he's working with a really talented artist in Akian, who just does like absolutely fantastic work. There's not too many, I would say, explicit spreads, but these panel layouts look so good. And there's a lot of detail in Akian's art, but there's also just this very rich style. It's like really like hard for me to say like it's a specific like very comic booky style, but it just looks very stylized, but it also has this very rich detail. And of course, a lot of this has to do with the color work from Gabe Eltaeb, whether you're talking about these darker scenes, whether you're talking about like brighter scenes like this, where there's artificial lighting, or you're talking about like these more dark and dreary scenes of like storms and everything, going from, like I said, more artificial lighting. Everything looks very clean, crisp, and it just pops off the page. And of course, the lettering is really good as well. And like I said, this is a 128 pager. There is a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of stuff going on in this book, which can make it a bit hard to follow at times. But like I said, you've got a very good, I'd say, standard overarching plot, which doesn't break any new ground. It's not revolutionizing the art of storytelling or anything like that. Like I said, it's basically just basic theme of Star Wars, which it works. And honestly, I think it's one of the reasons why you go for something that works like that. And as long as you do it well, most people are going to give you that leeway and use basically retelling a story that's been told before, as long as you're doing it well, and as long as you can have like your own interesting spin on it. I would say Empyrean does that quite well. And just like I said, flipping through the art, it's just a joy to flip through Akian's art and just read it. Like I said, you go from like the spreads, the layouts look really good. You have, if I could find that scene like this scene right here, it's just like these panel layouts are just very masterfully done. So that's part of what I'll always try and emphasize in any of the reviews that I do is like, is there a good panel layout? And I would say definitely there is that in Acheon's art. You can have very like unique panel layouts, but I would say this isn't like unique in a sense. It's just laid out really well. So these pages, they don't look like anything, like they're not using the panel layouts to do anything like really wacky or anything like that. There are other books that do that, but it's just this is really competent, well laid out art that's drawn very well with a lot of detail, and it shows on every single page. So it's structured very well, and as I have said before, there is a lot of lettering. I can show up, try to show it here, but there's just a lot of dialogue on these pages. And it's laid out very well by Gabe El-Taib, who's the letterer. There's like one word bubble I had to reread and throughout this entire book. And like I said, it's 128 pages. And there's like dialogue, characters talking basically throughout most of this. It's very character driven, which means that there is some world building, but the world kind of just exists to drive like the story forward. And you've got this husband and wife duo who are basically the apex of the rebellion, and they're the center of the story along with their family. And you've got like this very traditional masculine feminine relationship. You know, the male Oliver kind of gives you that Han Solo vibe, and you've got his wife Elvira, if I'm getting her name correctly, does have that like Leia, you know, this Leia vibe to her. You know, kind of sort of like Star Wars, or just like this, like very competent, like smart scientist. If you think of someone like Yaira, Dr. Sally Rodell, where she's just like respected and competent, but she does have the feminine wiles, right? And I think it's just a fantastic story to tell, and it's got, of course, this like very, I'd say, complete lack of feminism influencing the characters and the motivations of this book, which is very sorely needed in today's, I'd say, very feminized culture. So it's a very competent book in the way that it's laid out. Artistically, plot-wise, is very good. Like I said, it's more character-driven. It's more character-driven. There is world building, but it's not really like stop to explain like what Spud is, the political like structure of Solus, or like how Casimir became the emperor or anything like that. Though the world kind of just exists to immerse the reader and drive the story forward, rather than giving like this super complex, in-depth explanation of everything that goes on. Like, you know, it's like Warhammer 40K, or reading the Silmarillion from Lord of the Rings. If you want something like that, this book's not going to deliver on that. What this book really does do well is giving you a really nice, epic sci-fi space opera experience in comic book form. So it does have that cinematic, immersive feel, but you are reading a comic book. And it's, like I said, it's done very well. The art is laid out very well, what they're talking about Acheon and how he just draws and brings the detail. And of course, the color work and the lettering on top of that just really makes everything pop and keeps the reader immersed from the beginning to the end, I would say. It's, like I said, 128 pages, and I was pretty engaged throughout reading all of this. Book is absolutely fantastic. And just like I said, flipping through all of this art just to show it off is absolutely fantastic. It just looks really great, whether we're talking about panel layouts like this or spreads like this. And it just has this fantastic pacing. Like I said, there's just such a great amount of detail in this, but it still maintains this fantastic stylization. All the backgrounds and character designs look really nice. Everything is very clear and easily to see, but there's still this immense amount of detail. So it's really indicative that Acheon knows what he's doing when he's drawing, because you can have books that have like very plain backgrounds. You have books that have like, they try to go for a lot of art in the background, but it can just turn off as visual noise. There's no visual noise. There's no lines that are misplaced in this book. There's no character designs that look awkward or anything like that. Everything is intentionally done, and it's done masterfully. And then you have, like I said, the color work is masterfully done as well. So the colors and the lettering really meet with the art, and then you get a fantastic visual experience. And then with the writing, like I said, it's a very dense story. There is a lot that goes on, so some things can get lost in the cracks, or it can be a bit hard to wrap your head around because the world building isn't like as solid as it could have been. But what you do get is this really nice overarching plot. You get a lot of really interesting character interactions, and you get a story that definitely has really good timeless values, and something that really ought to have a sequel and be explored far more. So hopefully they do make more Empyrean books, Big Man Comics, because there's a really interesting premise behind this book. Definitely want to see more of it. There's definitely an ending that makes it like worth having a sequel, but it feels very earned. It doesn't feel like an unsatisfying cliffhanger. It feels like the natural development of the story. So it is structured well in terms of its plot and its writing, and all these little moments that happen in the book definitely makes it feel very much more real and human, rather than it just being like this stiff going through the motions, trying to be this like sci-fi epic and not really coming off as anything more than that. It definitely has that like personal grounded aspect to it, along with like the epic sci-fi space action, which is a bit hard to pull off, but I think it's pulled off well. And like I said, it's not really doing anything new in terms of the overarching plot structure. It's basically Star Wars, but it does it well and has its own spin on it, which is really all you can ask for with basically any story. There's only about like 7 unique stories, and everything else is just like a retelling of that. And I think this retelling of Star Wars is done quite well. And it's basically how the book was marketed. It's basically like the classic epic sci-fi movies you grew up with, basically in comic book form and done without all the woke nonsense. And that definitely is what Empyrean is. It's done very well. If you can snag this book, I highly recommend it. That's all I have to say for you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Joker is out.
Thank you for stopping by the Velvet Room. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you can keep up with Velvet Room Publishing. And go to velvetroompublishing.com if you want to go even deeper into the Velvet Room.